Good to be back with you. Adam, today we were talking about we're gonna kind of hit several things and
That's right.
and kind of be all over the board on some things, and kind of like we did last week, which was enjoyable.
Yeah, I enjoy doing that, and
yeah,
talking about what we've looked at and what's going on, and
yeah,
things of that nature. And so, yeah, we can hit a little bit of Ephesians, and also on Wednesday night, and hopefully, just get into some practical stuff about, specifically today, we're going to talk a little bit about the local church and the importance of the local church, and how that, in some people's minds, I fear the local church has lost its significance, lost the meaning and the big picture of what the local church is and why we need it so much. And so we can hit a little bit about that as well.
Yeah.
Still plaguing it on Wednesday night with all these plagues of Egypt.
Yeah, with the plagues, yeah. Well, I'm joking around when I say this and everything, but after Saturday, Alabama and Auburn fans both needed the local church.
I got a text Saturday night and said, well, I guess only about half the people will show up tomorrow for church since Alabama lost to Vanderbilt. And I responded, I said, well, the church ought to be full of people coming up and praying.
Right.
So, it was not good. We're recording this on Monday, and I had to run out and run some places and was on the way back, and Paul Feinbaum's show was coming on. And he said, this may be the greatest week of the Paul Feinbaum show ever, with all these Alabama fans calling in. And so I had one of our Auburn fans at church yesterday. After the first service, I saw him in his care group, and he said, if you need some help coping as an Auburn fan, I can give you some tips. I was like, well, thanks for that.
That's pretty good.
Thanks for that. So,
yeah.
It's interesting, though. We talk about football. When I was a teenager, in my 20s, an Alabama loss, I mean, it was crushing. It just like ruined your whole day and everything else. And, I'm a huge football fan and even bigger basketball fan. And,
right.
Saturday, I mean, it stunk that we lost and didn't play well and everything else. But I don't know if it's maturity or everything going on. Oh, well, I mean, I hate we lost, but, I've got other things to do and prepare for. And so I guess in that aspect, that's a good response, but still stunk.
Yeah,
Anyway, these people that spend their whole life worried about, a loss.
That's tough.
That's tough. What a miserable way to live.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
My dad, he probably wouldn't want me sharing this. That's all right. I'll tell him not to watch the podcast. He tells a story when he was young, which was many years ago now, and Bear Bryant was still coaching. I think it was Bear Bryant. They had lost a game to Mississippi State. And he said he remembered pulling on the side of the road and throwing up. It just he hated it. It just so disgusted by it. So anyway, he's not like that anymore either.
Right.
So, those are good things.
Yeah.
Good things. If you're like that at home, I'm sorry. We're calling you out a little bit.
Yeah.
There's more important things in life than a ball game.
Right. For sure.
So you want to jump in here and talk a little bit about Ephesians?
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's do that.
So, yesterday we've been working through Ephesians this fall, and yesterday we was in Ephesians 2 verses 11 through 22, and I'm actually going to spend 2 weeks on it. This upcoming Sunday we've got the Lord's Supper coming up, and what a beautiful picture that this passage paints for us about this dividing wall of hostility that's broken down vertically between us and God, and then horizontally between us and other people. The gospel is doing such an incredible work. When the gospel is working, you see peace in your relationship with the Lord and peace between other people. That we quit being judgmental, and that hostility, that wall of hostility comes tumbling down. And so this upcoming Sunday, we'll be looking a little bit more specifically at what Jesus had accomplished for us, which is going to lead us right into the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
I am really looking forward to worshiping with our church family and sharing the Lord's Supper. But this past Sunday in this passage, we really got into looking at the separation that exists between Jews and Gentiles. We talked about the brokenness and the hostility that exists in our world, and we gave a lot of different illustrations and examples, whether it be international relationships, whether it be the U.S. government, whether it be marriages, the family, just the moral decay that we see. There's a lot of brokenness in our world. You think about what's going on up in the Carolinas right now as they're trying to rebuild, and lives that are lost, and even the creation, even in that moment as we try to care and love for other people, violent hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes, that is in a way the creation groaning because things aren't right.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a sinful world, we live in a polluted world, and so everything's groaning. And we talked about the hostility that exists in people's homes, and that it's a picture that things aren't right.
Yeah.
And so I asked a question in the sermon that I think this passage Paul here is talking about. He's trying to get the Ephesian church to see what is the solution to brokenness and catastrophe in our world. What's the solution? What is God's answer to this problem? And we see that it is Christ, it's the gospel, but the living out picture of that is the local church. Local churches that are all over the place in all parts of the world. And so we really got into this understanding I was preaching through. There is such thing as what we would call the invisible church, or Big C church, if you will, where there's Christians all over the world that's a part of the church. Yeah. And the Bible talks about that. But man, the scriptures are very clear. I mean, all of these New Testament letters are written to local churches. And so those local bodies of believers, the visible church that meets together, that worships together, that serves together all over Jasper, all over Walker County, throughout the United States and around the world, the local church really is that visible manifestation of kind of an outpost, kind of a taste of heaven on earth. And we get into this way of thinking, and you hear a lot of people say this, well, I can be a Christian and not go to church. I don't have to have a church. I can be. It's just me and God. I heard somebody say one time, and I think I've used this from time to time, how can you say that you're in a vibrant relationship with Jesus and say, but I hate his bride? Because the church is the bride of Christ. And what we need when we become a Christian, when we seek the Lord in forgiveness and he begins that work in our life, we would think that it was unloving. We would think that it was brutality. We would think it was abandonment if a baby was left on the side of the road to fend for himself. And so spiritually, it's the same way. God has given us a family, and it's called the church, the local church. And without it, we're in a precarious position. We can't grow like we're supposed to. We don't function like we're supposed to. We don't think like we're supposed to, because the local church provides all of that. Healthy local churches are vital. It's God's plan. It's God's purpose. It's the way of God in working in this world. And so we talked a little bit yesterday how the local church, rightly understood, is far more than just showing up on a Sunday morning and checking a box.
Yeah, that's right.
It's more than just singing songs, as important as that is. It's more than just gathering with other believers. When we were doing this, not only is that the work of God week by week by which we individually are being developed and growing, but this corporate dimension of being a part of the local church really ought to be a picture to the world that there is hope in the midst of brokenness. And I forget exactly who I quoted. I think it was Christopher Ashe or Alistair Begg that talked about that in the local church. In the local church, there are the seeds or the DNA of the remade world, this new creation that God's promising us, heaven on earth. And so the local church ought to be that.
Right.
It ought to be that for a world that's hurting, that is lonely, that is struggling, that is hopeless, that is living in darkness in a lot of different ways. The local church ought to be that. And so, when you think about the local church, and I want you to be thinking, we'll talk a little bit, what are some specific ways that you have seen the local church throughout your life and here at Glory be that in your life and offer that picture of hope and that picture of hospitality and welcome to a world that desperately needs to feel some of that?
Yeah. Well, I just thinking of our church, of course, would use it as an example and all. And I mean, from my time here, from day one until present time, it's always been a welcoming place to every person, And I mean, and we hear it all the time. People coming in that have never been here before. or coming from other places, that's one of the first things they talk about. Is they feel welcome, they feel love, they feel unity, and that's the thing about it. If you spend any time out just in society and in the world, you are going to see just depression and anger and just one thing on top of another, because that's what is in the world. And so when you're living in that, all the time, and it may be in your workplace, it may be wherever you are, then I'm so happy to say that we can. And this isn't a bragging thing, but that our church is like that it can be that place of hope, that you come here and you do feel loved, and you're going to hear the gospel, and you're going to be able to worship with other believers. And we talk about it in Discovering Glory. There's pastoral care, just all the things that go along with that. And so and not just our church. That's going on in lots and lots of churches all over.
That outpost of heaven.
Yes.
In specific cities around the world.
Yes,
specific
that's right.
Towns around the world, which is the way it ought to be.
And we weren't made to be on an island by ourselves. We were made to. We need each other.
And we need each other to be that corporate light and salt in our communities. I mean, he's writing this letter to Christians, probably several local churches in the Ephesus area, and so they're all reading this letter at different times when it comes to them, or hearing it read. And it's just a reminder of their purpose and place and mission in their community, of how they're to live, of how they're to treat one another, of how, and one thing that we mentioned yesterday in the sermon, didn't have time to dig deep into this. There's a unity and a harmony that ought to exist within the local church that's not forced. Okay? It's not forced. It's not a fake unity. It is a real unity that is centered around the gospel and the forgiveness of sin. And so, a hospitality and a love that doesn't welcome people as they are and say you can stay that way. Keep living in your sins. No, it's a love and a hospitality that welcomes people where they are and says the gospel is changing and transforming us.
Right.
It is teaching us. It is removing those things that harm us and kill us, so that we are unified under our head, which is Jesus, and we are his body. And so we're serving together in the midst of diverse gifts and talents and socioeconomic levels, that we are worshiping together and we love one another, which, as you said, is just the opposite of what we see in our world. We're divided over politics. We're divided over economics. The church ought to be a place that provides and pictures something different than that. I don't know about you. I'm getting tired of the political ads.
Oh, yeah.
I'm getting tired of really the talk of politics. Not to say that we shouldn't vote. We should. We should be well informed, and we should vote as best we can, according to the scriptures. It seems like both sides kind of messed that up. But we should be well informed on these things. But the church should not be a place where we're divided like our nation's divided.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's a good question. If you're watching this podcast and you go to Glory, if you're watching this podcast and you're not a member of Glory, to ask a couple questions. Number one, am I plugged into a local church? Am I that unifying, praying, serving individual that's seeking to serve and bless other people? Is our church that picture of what heaven on earth is going to be like in the midst of a divisive world? And so whether you're at Glory or you're somewhere else, I think these are important questions that we have to ask and do some self-examination.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're a member of a local church somewhere, whether it be here at Glory or another church, locally or wherever you are, we use the word intentional all the time, and we have to make a decision, to make a choice that that is going to be a priority in my life, that I'm going to attend services, and I'm not going to let other things get in the way of that, or just flippantly make a decision, well, I'm not going today for whatever reason it is. And, and I know there are times when, we miss occasionally for a vacation or, something
Sickness.
like, sickness or something like that. But, if you look back on the year and you've missed as much as you've attended, you need to reevaluate.
Well, because here's the deal. Not only is that unhealthy for you, it's unhealthy for the church.
Yes, exactly.
Because individually, we need the corporate body.
Yeah.
But the corporate body needs each individual.
That's right.
And so in missing and not making, church attendance and service, giving, I mean, you go down the list of what it means to be a part of a local body of believers. When one member of the family is not doing what they have been called to do, it hurts that member, but it hurts the rest of the body.
That's
right. It hurts the rest of the family. I think I'd shared with you, I'm doing some reading for my D group, our discipleship group that meets together, and we're doing reading through Kent Hughes's book, Spiritual Disciplines of a Godly Man, and the chapter that we are discussing and reading this week has to do with the discipline of the church. And I'm probably going to share this illustration at some point in the next few weeks with our church family on a Sunday morning, but he talks about spiritual hitchhiking. And he says, when you think of a hitchhiker on the road, somebody who, not just down on their luck, but this is the pattern of their life, they're hitchhiking. He said the hitchhiker sticks his thumb out, wanting to ride in somebody else's vehicle where they're paying the gas, where they're paying for all the repairs, where they're paying the insurance on the car. And then if something goes wrong, the hitchhiker says, well, I can get out and go, and I'll find a nicer, newer ride for me to ride in. And then he says, spiritual hitchhiking, we have a lot of those, particularly here in America, where we have our thumb out. We know we need to be in church, or we want our kids in church, or our youth in church. And so we're looking for that spiritual vehicle that has the greatest youth program and the greatest kids program, or the greatest music, or the best preacher. And we stick our thumb out and we say, okay, I'll get into that, and I'll be a part of that for a while, as long as everybody else is doing all the serving, as long as everybody else is doing all the giving, as long as everybody else is doing what I want to do. And if things get a little bit hard and tough and aren't going the way that I want to, I'll get out and I'll find the new car, the new vehicle that fits my expectations.
Yeah.
But he's talking about there's no intentionality.
Yeah.
There's no buy-in. And he says that is destructive. That's a destructive thing, not only for us individually, but for local churches.
Right.
We are a people who are committed and connected to one another.
That's right. Yeah, so, that's a good analogy.
It blew me away when I read it, man. It was like something so simple like that really drives home kind of where we are as a society and as a culture when it comes to commitment. If I've got a different ball team that comes along that's better, I'll ditch this team. And we see this in college sports right now.
Yeah.
You're seeing it all over with NIL and the transfer portal. Well, I didn't get enough playing time. I'm going to go somewhere else. You're not paying me enough. I'm going to quit on my team and go somewhere else. And it's really pervasive in society, and it's even in the church, and it's a very unhealthy thing.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's right.
Do we have time to talk about anything else, or you think we're...
Yeah, I think we can spend a few minutes.
Good deal. Well, we talked about the flies last Wednesday night. We've been talking about the plagues on Wednesday night. And so this last week it was the flies that we talked about, and how these were probably some type of stinging fly or biting fly that the Egyptians dealt with. This was the plague that we talked about. And, flies drive me crazy, Randy. A single fly moving around in my face is distracting and frustrating, and I can't wait to kill it. And you just imagine the amount of flies that came upon the Egyptians at that time. And one of the things that we talked about in that particular plague, the people of Israel in Goshen were spared, and just how miraculous that was. It'd almost be like the city limits of Jasper not being touched by a plague of flies while everything around it in Walker County was hit with it. You would have to say there was something supernatural about that.
Yeah.
And so that's what we hit on there. Anything about the flies that stand out to you?
I was thinking about that, and just a quick story. When the year that I went to Uganda, over to, we have a mission team that goes there every year, if you didn't know that, and have a sister church over there and all that. But anyway, we were driving down a road that was, I mean, it was just kind of out, away from itself, away from everything else, and by itself, and, you know, just old, I mean, you know, big old ruts and stuff, all just rough road we were driving down through there, just, you know, kind of jungle woods on each side, that type of thing. And, I mean, out of nowhere, flies swarmed our vehicle. And we had our windows down because there was no air conditioning. And, I mean, it was those biting flies.
Yeah. You enjoyed that, didn't you?
Oh, man, it was awful. And so we finally got the windows rolled up. And every now and then one would get into the van somehow, you know, whatever. But anyway, and then we drove, I don't know how far it was, maybe a half a mile, and then we were out of them. You know, so thinking about that plague and thinking about that, you know, I just can't even imagine. And
this was constant. You know? I don't know how long exactly it went on, but can't sleep, can't eat.
Right.
I mean, it's just these plagues on Egypt, when you really slow down and think about the wrath of God being poured out on the people to wake them up and get their attention.
Yeah.
And the fact that Pharaoh kept coming back and saying, I'm not going to let them go. He hardened his heart. Isn't this a picture of the devil?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the devil makes promises that this will satisfy or that will satisfy this sin. If you do this will bless you. You know, you'll enjoy it, and that whole sin is fun for a season. But it really gives us a picture of the devil and all these plagues with Pharaoh's hardness. Pharaoh didn't care about his people.
Mm-hmm.
He did not care about the people that he was ruling over, because if he did, he would have said, no more of these plagues. I'll do whatever to protect the Egyptian people.
Yeah.
And yet he continues to harden his heart. The devil will make you all kinds of promises.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't care about you.
Yeah.
He doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about this world. He wants to see it burn.
Right.
And that's kind of the picture that we get of Pharaoh with those Egyptians and the Israelites. And so we'll be on to the next plague this Wednesday night, kind of talking about the Egyptian deities that are destroyed in each of these plagues. We have a good time with this. It's been good discussion on Wednesday nights. Our people really have gotten into discussing it and thinking about it, and hopefully we're learning a little bit something.
Yeah, that's good. Well, so like we said, you know, coming up this Sunday, we are looking forward to participating in the Lord's Supper with our church family, and that's always a very special time, you know, when we do that together, and the way in which we do that is a little bit different. And
you may explain it just for
a
minute?
Go ahead.
So, you know, and I'm not throwing shade on any church I've been a part of ever. I know my fault, not my church's fault, but my fault.
Yeah.
My fault.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, even as a believer, the Lord's Supper was always kind of the tag along at the end of the service, you know, about once a quarter. And I remember, you know, the deacons would hand that thing out, and you knew it was a special moment, but it almost seemed kind of rushed, or at least it was in my mind.
Yeah, I have a tendency to not put a lot of thought into it.
Not put a lot of thought into it, and maybe it was just me getting out of there, and so shame on me. And so when I came to Glory years ago, the two things that I really wanted to make important were our prayer groups that we have on Wednesday nights and the Lord's Supper. And so I just started brainstorming, have a few conversations, because I had only ever seen the Lord's Supper done one way, really, and that was, you know, the deacons would come up, or the ushers, whoever, would come up, and they would hand it out to everybody corporately, and you'd take your cracker and you'd take your cup, and then
they just pass it down the
road. And there's nothing wrong with that. We've done that here before.
Yeah, nothing wrong with it.
It's a beautiful picture when we're all doing it together, and so you know, not saying anything negative about that, but we wanted some way to be a little bit more intentional about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so got to talking back in the early days of Glory, and when we usually, and most times when we have the Lord's Supper together, we have tables set up front, and our deacons, we'll have two deacons behind each table, and those deacons have prepared, they've read, they've talked with each other about, you know, how they're going to challenge their group. And so families in our church will make their way up, and we'll have 3 to 4 families around each table per time, and everybody else is kind of waiting. And our deacons lead you through. They get you to thinking about the significance of the Lord's Supper. And usually I have already preached to the table, so I'm preaching towards the Lord's Supper. and then our deacons come up, and man, it is a special time.
Yeah.
Standing around the table, being challenged, taking the Lord's Supper. And I don't know if it's just the fact of getting up. I don't know if it's that our deacons are really so prepared or whatever. The Lord's blessing upon the way we do the Lord's Supper has been very meaningful and is special through the years.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll be sharing in that way again Sunday morning. It takes a little time to do it that way.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
It takes about 20 or 30 minutes, and so we'll make some adjustments in the service. But, man, what a special time of worship and reflection that we're going to have this Sunday morning around the table.
Yeah, that's great. Looking forward to that. And so anything else?
I think we're good.
Yeah.
I think we're good.
So, again, we enjoy doing these podcasts and hoping that you guys, really get something out of it and able to apply some things to your life. Also, again, if there's anybody out there watching that doesn't have a church home, we invite you to Glory Fellowship. We have services on Sunday mornings at 9 and 10:30, care groups during both services. And then we have a service on Wednesday night at 6 o'clock, as Adam was talking about, with prayer time and teaching. So we'd love for you to come and be a part of that, and we appreciate you being with us.